Hello, welcome to the Purple Planet, where we help you drift into dreamland with the timeless and historical tales of queens, empresses, priestesses, and warriors from across the ages. As you begin to relax and your eyes grow heavier, allow yourself to drift backward through the hush of centuries, through the gentle folds of time. Let the world around you soften, shadows growing longer. As a quiet evening settles over your thoughts, long before the ships came, before iron boots pressed the yielding earth and smoke streaked the blue, Hispaniola breathed with the rhythm of the sea. In the waning years of the 15th century, the island's heartbeat beneath emerald canopies, where the ceiba trees reached for the sun and the rivers carried songs to the ocean, mornings broke with the hush of dew on plantain leaves and the hush of wings, herons, parrots, doves, filling the air with color and music. Along the white crescent of Xaragua's beaches, the breeze carried the voices of children and the laughter of women weaving baskets beside the water. Here, in the western valleys of Xaragua, was born Anacaona, her name meaning golden flower. She was the daughter of the land's warmth and the sister of its rivers, her spirit woven into the tapestry of her people, the Taíno. They lived by the calendar of the sun and moon, planting cassava in rich red earth, shaping canoes from mighty trunks, and gathering in the cool of the evening to share stories beneath the stars. Their world was gentle yet strong, shaped by reverence for Zimis, the unseen spirits that whispered in wind and rain. The Taíno were agrarian and peaceful, their lives arranged in cacicazgos, or chiefdoms, each led by a cacique. Their society honored women as healers, artists, and in rare cases, leaders. The world of the Taíno was not ruled by men alone. Theirs was a culture of ceremonial music and communal feasts, of sacred ereitos, where poetry and dance wove memory into body and breath. They believed in the cycles of the natural world, in the sanctity of birth and burial, and in the promise of the afterlife, where the spirits lingered among the ceibas. Anacaona flourished in this world, a leader, a poet, a diplomat, and, in time, a tragic heroine. She would come to straddle two worlds, the age of peace and the storm of conquest. The story of Anacaona is not only the tale of a woman's life, but the memory of a people whose voices still echo in the hills and rivers, in the hush before dawn, in the whisper of the islands. Anacaona's story began around the year 1474, in the lush valleys of Xaragua, in what is now Haiti. The land here, shaped by volcanic ridges and rivers that flowed like silver threads, was the heart of a cacicazgo, one of the 5 great chiefdoms that divided the island. Her brother Bohichio ruled as cacique, wise and steady, his authority rooted not in force but in kinship and trust. It is believed that Anacaona was born into a longhouse built of palm and mahogany, its thatched roof sheltering her family from the sun and rain. The air inside was sweet with the scent of cassava bread baking on clay griddles, and outside the village hummed with the energy of daily life. Women pounded maize and spun cotton, their laughter mingling with the songs of the men returning from the fields or the sea. From her earliest days, Anacaona was surrounded by the rich traditions of her people. Oral tradition says she sat at her mother's knee, listening to the elders recount the origins of the world, how the first Taíno emerged from caves, how the gods shaped the mountains and rivers, how the spirits of the ancestors lingered in the twilight. The Taíno believed that all things were alive with meaning. The ceiba tree was sacred, its roots a bridge to the underworld. The moon was the mother of tides and harvests. The bat and the owl were messengers between worlds. In the evenings, the village gathered for aritos, ritual performances where history was sung and danced into memory. Even as a child, Anacaona's voice rose above the others, clear and sure, her words weaving tales of stars and storms, of love and loss. She learned to play the mayohuacan, a drum carved from tree trunks, its deep sound echoing the heartbeat of the earth. The elders recognized her gift, and soon she was apprenticed as a sacred poet, one who could shape words into offerings for the zemis. Life in Xaragua was communal and cooperative. Land was held in common, and the harvest was shared. Children learned by imitation, following their parents through the cycles of planting, fishing, and gathering. Girls were taught to weave and sing, to heal wounds with herbs, to honor the spirits with song. Boys learned to craft tools and hunt, but the boundaries between the men's and women's work were softer than elsewhere in the world. Women in Taíno society held power and respect. While the chiefdoms were not wholly matriarchal, daughters could inherit leadership, and women's voices were heard in council. Anacaona's mother was known as a healer, and her aunt, or so the elders whispered, had once challenged a male cacique in debate and won. In such soil, Anacaona grew, quick-witted, curious, and unafraid to question. The world she knew was not untouched by conflict, but violence was rare and quickly resolved. Disputes between villages were settled with gifts and words, not weapons. When storms battered the coast, or drought threatened the crops, the people gathered under the seepee and sang for the spirit's favor, trusting that balance would return. By the time Anacaona entered her teenage years, it was clear she was marked for greatness. Her talent for sacred poetry, her understanding of the old stories, and her instinct for peace set her apart. It is said that even Bohechio, her proud brother, looked to her for counsel. The people of Xaragua saw in her the promise of wisdom and the grace of the golden flower for which she was named. Yet, beyond the horizon, unseen sails were catching the wind. The world of the Taíno, vibrant and whole, stood at the edge of a shadow it could not yet name. As Anacaona blossomed into adulthood, the world around her shifted, shaped by alliances and the subtle currents of ambition and kinship. It was in the years just before the century's turn, beneath the wide skies of Maguana, that she forged a union which would alter the fate of the island. She married Caonabo, the formidable cacique of Maguana, a chiefdom nestled in the mountainous heart of Hispaniola. This was no ordinary marriage. It was a weaving together of two great houses, a joining of spirit and strategy. Caonabo's reputation was already legend. Oral tradition says he came from the distant lands of the Lucayan Islands, drawn to Hispaniola by tales of its richness. His eyes were sharp, his will unbending, and his authority was recognized by friend and rival alike. The Taíno called him both warrior and sage, and even his Spanish enemies would later speak in wary tones of his intelligence and resolve. Anacaona and Caonabo's marriage was celebrated with the grandest of aritos, days of dance, feasting, and sacred song. The union was more than romantic. It was a calculated alliance, one that united the western and central regions of the island. Xaragua and Maguana, under their guidance, became a beacon of strength among the cacicazgos. Fields flourished, trade routes flowed with new abundance, and the people spoke with pride of the golden flower and her warrior chief. Within the great bohíos of Maguana, Anacaona's influence deepened. She became more than a wife. She was a trusted advisor, a diplomat, a voice of wisdom in council. When disputes arose between neighboring caciques, it was often Anacaona who bridged the distance, her words tempered with grace and insight. It is believed that she mediated quarrels, arranged marriages, and brokered treaties, always seeking the harmony that had sustained her people for generations. The Taíno world, though peaceful by nature, was far from static. Alliances ebbed and flowed like the tides, and the memory of past sorrows lingered. Yet, with Anacaona at Caonabo's side, the chiefdoms of the West and Center stood stronger, bound by blood and shared vision. Her poetry grew in stature, her arrieros drawing crowds from distant villages. In the glow of firelight, she sang of the land's bounty, of unity, of hope. For a fleeting moment, Hispaniola seemed poised for renewal, a tapestry of kinship and power, woven together by the golden flower and the warrior who loved her. But the horizon, ever restless, was darkening with sails and omens. Anacaona's role as diplomat and peacemaker would soon be tested by forces she could not have foreseen, forces that would demand all her courage, all her wisdom, and all her heart. In the autumn of 1492, the world shifted, whispered first by fishermen and traders. The news arrived on the winds, strange ships, their sails white as herons, drifting over the horizon. The Taíno, curious and generous, watched as these floating houses approached the shores of Guanahani, and then soon after, the northern coasts of Hispaniola. They could not have known that these visitors, led by a man named Cristobal Colon Columbus, carried with them a hunger that knew no bounds. The first encounters were gentle. The Taíno greeted the Spanish with gifts of fruit, cotton, and gold trinkets. Anacaona and Caonabo heard tales of these newcomers in the bohíos of Maguana, men with pale skin and shining armor, bearing weapons of thunder and steel. It is believed that Anacaona, ever the diplomat, counseled caution and hospitality. The Taíno worldview, shaped by reciprocity and ceremony, taught that strangers be welcomed and honored. Yet, even as feasts were shared and songs exchanged, unease settled over the land. The Spanish built fortresses, first La Navidad on the northern coast in late 1492, then others, each more imposing than the last. Their outposts became islands of suspicion and greed. The Taíno soon realized that these men did not come merely to visit, but to stay, to claim, and in time, to command. Tension rose quickly. The Spanish demanded tribute, gold above all, which they believed grew in abundance in Hispaniola's rivers. When the Taíno could not meet their insatiable demands, the newcomers' friendliness curdled to violence. Fields were trampled, women taken, men forced to labor under lash and chain. Oral tradition says that Anacaona wept in secret for her people, even as she sought to calm the rising storm. Caonabo, for his part, would not bend. Proud and unyielding, he saw through the veils of Spanish diplomacy. In 1493, he led a coalition of Taíno chiefs in a daring assault against La Navidad, seeking to reclaim dignity and peace. The fort fell in flames, its garrison destroyed. For a moment, hope flickered among the Taíno. Perhaps the invaders could be repelled. Their appetite for gold sated elsewhere. But the Spanish answered with greater force. In 1495, Alonso de Ojeda, a cunning lieutenant, was dispatched to bring Caonabo to heel. Oral tradition says he arrived in Maguana, bearing gifts and false promises of friendship. It is believed that during a council of peace, Ojeda presented Caonabo with polished manacles, claiming they were royal ornaments from Spain. When Caonabo slipped them over his wrists, he was seized and bound, betrayed in the heart of his own Bohio. Caonabo was taken in chains to the coast, destined for Spain. The sea swallowed him. He died in captivity, never to see his homeland again. Anacaona, newly widowed, returned to her natal Xaragua, sorrow etched deep in her heart. Her brother Bohechio, who had long ruled Xaragua, grew old and weary, and when he died around the year 1500, the mantle of leadership passed to Anacaona, now cacica, chieftainess of Xaragua. Anacaona faced a world transformed. Her people, once untroubled and free, now lived in the shadow of foreign guns and greedy eyes. Hispaniola's rivers still sang, and the teba trees still soared. But the dream of peace was slipping away, carried like Caonabo into the unknown. With the death of Bohechio and the loss of Caonabo, a heavy silence hung over the valleys of Xaragua. The elders held council beneath the old teba, and it was Anacaona, golden flower, rose to speak. Her voice trembled with sorrow, but her words were clear. She would lead as cacique, not through the terror of arms, but with wisdom and the deep-rooted strength of her ancestors. It is believed that Anacaona's reign began in the first years of the new century, around 1500, a time when the air itself seemed charged with uncertainty. The Spanish presence had grown like a shadow, stretching across the island's hills and barrancas. New towns, Santo Domingo, Concepcion de la Vega, rose where forests had stood, their streets laid out in foreign patterns, their stones heavy with the weight of conquest. Yet Anacaona chose not to meet violence with violence. She welcomed the Spaniards to Xaragua, hosting them with the full dignity of Taíno custom. There were feasts of cassava, roasted yuca and honeyed fruit, dances and arrieros that told the old stories and honored the zemis. To the Spanish, these gatherings seemed innocent and festive. But beneath the music and laughter, Anacaona's vigilance never faltered. Every gesture, every word was measured, a careful negotiation for her people's survival. The Spanish, led by governors who changed with the tides, courted Anacaona's favor. They saw in her both an obstacle and an opportunity, a leader who commanded respect, whose influence might be harnessed for peace or punished for defiance. Anacaona, for her part, played her role with grace. She gave gifts, offered shelter, and listened. In private, she counseled her people to patience and unity, urging them to preserve their ways, to remember who they were even as the world changed around them. Was she buying time? Was she hoping for a true peace, for coexistence between the peoples of the old world and the new? It is impossible to know. Some say she dreamed that her daughter and the children of Spain would one day dance together at Arraitos. Others believe she feared only to see her people broken and scattered, their stories lost like footprints in sand. Still, the strain grew. Spanish demands for tribute increased. The encomienda system, forced labor disguised as protection, spread suffering and hunger among the Taíno. Every season brought fresh rumors of rebellion and fresh threats of retribution. Anacaona walked a narrow path, balancing resistance and diplomacy, her dignity intact, even as the world unraveled. Yet, through it all, the traditions of the Taíno endured. At dusk, the people still gathered for araitos, their feet stamping the earth in patterns older than memory. Anacaona's poetry, once sung in innocence, now carried undertones of warning and sorrow. She led the dances, her presence a living shield, her words a comfort to the frightened and the grieving. The Zimis, the spirits of the land and sky, were invoked with new urgency. The old stories were retold, each word a thread binding the people to their past and to each other. Anacaona's leadership was not that of a conqueror, but of a caretaker. Her strength lay in her compassion, her refusal to let fear dictate her choices. Even as the Spanish encircled Xaragua with suspicion and steel, she remained true to the teachings of her ancestors, to honor the land, to protect her people, and to greet each dawn with hope, no matter how dark the night had been. The storm, though, was gathering at the island's edge. New faces arrived from Spain, men with hard eyes and colder hearts. Among them was Nicolás de Ovando, the new governor, whose arrival would shatter the fragile peace Anacaona had fought so fiercely to preserve. Storm clouds gathered over Xaragua, both in sky and spirit. By 1502, Nicolás de Ovando had been named governor of the colony, arriving in Hispaniola with a fleet of 30 ships and 2,000 settlers, the largest expedition yet. His orders from Spain were clear: bring order, end resistance, and tighten the crown's grip on the island. Where earlier governors had wavered between negotiation and force, Ovando's resolve was cold and absolute. In Xaragua, Anacaona watched with wary eyes as Spanish soldiers built new roads and forts, their banners casting long shadows on the land. Still, she clung to the ways of her people. When Ovando announced a visit in 1503, Anacaona prepared as her ancestors had taught. The bohíos were swept clean, altars adorned with flowers, tables set with cassava, roasted fish and sweet fruit. Invitations were sent to the neighboring caciques, and the people gathered in anticipation, not of conquest, but of ceremony. Oral tradition says Anacaona's heart was heavy with foreboding, yet she greeted Ovando with dignity. The Spaniards arrived in Xaragua with 300 men, armed but smiling, their intentions hidden behind polished armor and false words. Anacaona welcomed them with feasts and sacred dances, her golden necklace flashing in the firelight as she led the arreíto. The Zimis were honored, the past invoked, the future, perhaps, negotiated. But Ovando had come not for peace, but for power. On the day appointed for the grand celebration, he summoned the assembled Taíno caciques, 80, it is believed, to a thatched meeting house. The Spanish claimed it was a council of friendship. Anacaona, ever the diplomat, entered with hope and caution. Without warning, the doors were barred. Ovando's men set the bohío aflame, trapping the caciques inside. Those who tried to escape were cut down by sword and crossbow. The air filled with the screams of the dying and the smoke of betrayal. Outside, Spanish soldiers fell upon the people of Xaragua, sparing neither child nor elder. It is said the river ran red and the drums fell silent. Anacaona was seized, her arms bound by rough rope. She did not plead, nor did she curse her captors. Witnesses described her as calm, her bearing regal even in defeat. Some Spanish chroniclers, perhaps uneasy in their guilt, later wrote admiringly of her beauty, her eloquence, her courage in the face of horror. The massacre at Xaragua marked the end of Taíno autonomy in the West. Survivors were scattered, some enslaved, some driven into the mountains and forests, where they lived as fugitives, clinging to fragments of their culture and faith. The Zemis were hidden or destroyed, the sacred arrieros silenced. Yet even in chains, Anacaona's spirit did not break. As she was led away from her homeland, the people whispered prayers to the spirits, hoping her strength might linger in the trees and the stones. The golden flower had been uprooted, but in the memory of her people, she remained uncrushed, a symbol of dignity and sacrifice in the face of relentless cruelty. After the massacre at Xaragua, the land mourned. The forests seemed quieter, the rivers slower, as if the island itself grieved the loss of its children. Anacaona, once the radiant heart of her people, was led away in chains toward Santo Domingo, the new capital of the Spanish colony. The journey was long, and the stories say she moved with a dignity that neither hunger nor humiliation could touch. In Santo Domingo, the city of stone and dust, Anacaona was held prisoner. The Spanish authorities accused her of sedition and conspiracy, though the evidence was little more than their own fear of her influence. Some chroniclers, such as Bartolomé de las Casas, would later admit that her trial was a farce, a performance meant to justify what had already been decided. The verdict was death. The day of her execution arrived, heavy with the scent of rain and the murmur of a restless crowd. It is believed that Anacaona asked for no mercy, nor did she weep. Oral tradition says she walked to the gallows with her head held high, her hair gleaming like black gold in the morning sun. The Spanish assembled to witness the spectacle. Some, it is said, averted their eyes as the noose was placed around her neck, struck by an unease they could not name. She was hanged publicly, likely in 1504, though the exact year has faded into shadow. In the silence that followed, a hush fell over the city. The Taíno who survived wept, and even some Spaniards wrote of her passing with reluctant admiration. They could not erase from memory the image of the golden flower who had faced her fate with unwavering courage. News of her death spread across Hispaniola, carried by traders, escaped captives, and the wind itself. Anacaona became more than a woman. She became a legend, her story woven into the songs and prayers of those who remembered the old ways. Her poetry and arrieros, once performed in celebration, now echoed as laments for a world lost to violence. Yet she did not pass into silence. In the years and centuries that followed, Anacaona's name lingered on the lips of the oppressed, the hopeful, and the grieving. She became a symbol of all that had been destroyed and all that might endure. Her story, once marked by tragedy, became a source of strength, a reminder that dignity and defiance could survive even the most brutal injustice. In the eyes of her people and in the memory of the land itself, Anacaona was never merely a victim. She was a martyr, a poet, and a queen whose spirit could not be broken. The Spanish chroniclers, despite their power, could not contain her legacy. The golden flower, though cut down, had scattered her seeds across the island, where they took root in sorrow and in hope. In the centuries that followed, the memory of Anacaona refused to fade. Her name, meaning golden flower, became a refrain woven into the lullabies of mothers and the whispered prayers of elders. In the villages that clung to the hillsides and the hearts of survivors' descendants, she was both mourned and celebrated, a symbol of what was lost and a promise that something sacred endured. Oral tradition says that after her death, the zemis wept and the ceiba trees bowed their branches in mourning. Some believed her spirit walked the moonlit beaches, her footsteps stirring the sand, her song carried in the hush of evening breezes. There are those who say that on certain nights, Anacaona's voice can still be heard in the rustle of palm fronds, singing of a world before sorrow. As the Spanish Empire tightened its grip on Hispaniola, the Taíno people were scattered, their numbers devastated by violence, disease, and enslavement. Yet stories of Anacaona traveled with them across mountains and rivers, into new generations. She became a legend of resilience, a thread running through Haitian and Dominican memory. Children learned her name before they could walk. Her story, once an act of remembrance, grew into a quiet act of resistance. In the centuries that followed, Anacaona's legacy blossomed in fields far beyond her homeland. In Haiti and the Dominican Republic, poets and songwriters invoked her as a muse. Her tale was told in the pages of novels, in the refrains of folk songs, and in the verses of national anthems. Artists painted her surrounded by golden petals and radiant light, a queen whose sorrow became strength. Writers like Jean-Priest Mars and Jacques Roumain reclaimed her as a symbol of indigenous dignity, while school children recited her story as part of their nation's birthright. It is believed that for some, she became more than a memory. Myths arose that Anacaona had not truly died, but escaped her captors, living on in secret among the Maroons and outlaws who defied colonial rule. Others claimed she transformed into a spirit of the ceiba, guardian of rivers and forests, protector of the forgotten. In the sacred groves, offerings of flowers and fruit were left in her honor, and the old songs, once forbidden, were sung in defiance and hope. Even as centuries passed, her image remained a beacon. During revolts against colonial power, rebels called on Anacaona's courage. In times of oppression, her legend was a shield against despair. The golden flower, crushed but not destroyed, bloomed anew in the hearts of those who longed for justice and belonging. Today, her story is remembered in the rhythm of drums, in the choreography of ceremonial dance, in the quiet dignity of those who refuse to forget. Anacaona is invoked as one of the first indigenous women to resist European colonization in the Americas. A leader, a poet, and a martyr whose grace endures. The winds that sweep across Hispaniola carry her memory still. The ceiba trees rise tall against the sky, guarding the secret places where history and myth entwine. The golden flower, torn from its stem, scattered its seeds across the island. And from those seeds, new blossoms have risen, defiant and bright. So ends the tale, yet it never truly ends. As long as the rivers run and the birds sing over Hispaniola, Anacaona's spirit lives, in legend, in song, and in the quiet strength of her people. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Anacaona of Hispaniola. We wish you sweet dreams